And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome aboard. I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook for this Monday, December 9th, 2024. And checking in on the sea ice, we've had some stronger winds up here through along the Chukchi coast, Bering Strait. We've seen the ice fill in, but with warmer air coming northward, we've seen temperatures this Monday afternoon as warm as 32 degrees up around Point Hope. Areas along Kotzebue Sound and Norton Sound have seen temperatures in the mid, even upper 30s to near 40 degrees in a few places, especially coming down here through the lower Yukon Valley. And these winds associated with low pressure that's currently working its way back towards St. Matthew as of mid-afternoon on this Monday. But we got another low that's going to take a similar track and crossing the Alaska Peninsula to a similar position by Wednesday afternoon. The ice here, at least the southern areas around Kuskokwim, Bristol Bay, are not likely to grow with the milder temperatures above freezing. The ice that exists here, at least the western edges, will have a tendency to want to pull westward as we return back toward more easterly offshore winds with time. So here's the situation late tonight into early Tuesday morning. Here comes the second low, the first one be located west of St. Matthew late tonight, early on Tuesday morning. And this low will take a similar track to the north and then northwest. We have the initial frontal boundary washes out as a trough along the Gulf Coast and up here north slope into northwest Canada. So by Tuesday afternoon, the low center kind of splits some of the energy heading back up into the Bering, and this other piece coming eastward with the front into the Gulf. And then on Wednesday, we have kind of this elongated frontal system with the main second low that came up out of the North Pacific, located similar spot as it is today on Monday afternoon, just southwest of St. Matthew. Weak little secondary low, lower Gulf, but otherwise this front will just kind of lift a little further north and wash out later in the week. So what do we expect for marine weather on Tuesday? The inner channels of the Panhandle winds will be south-southeast, as high as 20-25 knots, Petersburg down through Ketchikan, Metlakatla. Waves could be as high as 10-12 feet there within Dixon Entrance. Up there at Lynn Canal, south winds 15 knots, waves 3 feet. And for the outer coast, winds southeast to east at 30 knots, as high as 35 knots there, Cape Suckling, with waves 15 to 19 feet. And on Wednesday, inner channels will see southeast winds down here, Ketchikan, Metlakatla, 30 knots, 13-foot waves. For the inner channels, east or south winds 20 knots with waves 3-4 feet within Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage. And then out here along the outer coast, southeast winds to 30 knots west of Craig, south of Sitka. And then from Sitka north through Yakutat Bay, easterly winds to 25 knots, waves 17 to 18 feet, and as high as 35-knot gales there off of Cape Suckling. For the northwestern Gulf, outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance and along the Kenai coast, easterly gales to 35 knots, waves 13 to 15 feet. Within Prince William Sound, easterly winds 30 knots, 6-foot waves, but strongest winds in the region will be 45 to 50 knot storm force winds here, lower Cook Inlet, Kamishak Bay, with waves upwards of 15 and 17 feet on Tuesday. For Wednesday, we still have easterly gales 40 to 45 knots outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance, waves as high as 15, 18 feet. Easterly gales to 35 knots within Prince William Sound, with waves running 7 to maybe near 10 feet. And then as we go down Cook Inlet, from upper to middle Cook Inlet, northeast winds 25 to 20 knots, but still easterly winds of 30 knots there, lower Cook Inlet, and southeasterly toward Kennedy Entrance there with waves 9 to 12 feet. Across Kodiak Island on Tuesday, we have southeast to east gales to 40 knots, 11-foot waves within Shelikof Strait, 18-footers off of the east coast of the Kenai, 45-knot southeasterly gales just east of Chiknik with 17-foot waves, 45-knot southeasterly gales within Bristol Bay. And as we trail down off the lower end of the peninsula, we look for winds to be southeast to east at 25 knots. On Wednesday, the winds will not be quite as strong. Coming down across Kodiak Island, south-southwest winds 20 to 25 knots, or maybe a better way to look at it is just Look for westerly winds 25 to 30 knots on the North Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, and then on the Bering side, southwest winds 25 to 30 knots. Waves 7 feet outside there of Bristol Bay down to 10 feet north of Cold Bay. For the eastern Aleutians, northwest winds 30 to 35 knots on Tuesday as we get out toward the middle Aleutians. West winds 25 to 20 knots, and once we get out toward the far western Aleutians, Kiska to Shemya, variable to northwest winds 10 to 15 knots. On Wednesday, low pressure, we have the other low that's lifted northward again. So generally in the wake of that system, west winds 20 to 25 knots across the central and eastern Aleutians, becoming more southwesterly west of Adak, maybe as high as 30 knots from the southwest there, west of Kiska. And along outside of Bristol Bay and Kuskokwim Bay, we're looking at easterly gales of 40 to 45 knots on Tuesday. So any ice in these regions will have a tendency to want to push westward. And then along the lower Yukon coast, east winds 25 knots, 35 knot easterly winds across the open area there of Norton Sound. Ice in place, the ice will tend to want to shift westward with those strong offshore easterly winds. And then for Wednesday, winds do come down a bit. Winds will become more south-southwesterly, 20 knots into Bristol and Kuskokwim Bays, 30 knot southwest winds around the Pribilofs, south winds 30 knots St. Matthew. Still keeping an easterly offshore component along the lower Yukon coast, 25 knot easterly winds, and winds out of the east to 30 knots there within Norton Sound. And then across the lower half of the Chukchi Sea, Bering Strait, north side of St. Lawrence, west side of the Seward Peninsula, southeasterly gales to 35 knots. Quite a bit of ice in place, but there certainly will be some movement and shifting around with those kind of winds. Any open water could produce waves 5-7 feet. Along the Arctic coast, still brisk winds, 35 knot easterly gales around Point Thompson, Kaktovik, so there still could be some blowing snow there. And then on Wednesday, winds become fairly uniform across much of the region. Easterly 30-knot winds along the Beaufort Sea coast with ice in place. They fall off to about 25 knots between Point Lay and Point Hope, and then pick up again around 30 knots easterly winds out of Kotzebue Sound through the Bering Strait to down off the west side of the Seward Peninsula with ice in place, and any open water on the north side of St. Lawrence Island on Wednesday could see waves 4 to 6 feet.